I used to think that secondary progressive MS was sort of the orphan stepchild of the MS family, but these last couple of years, I can't complain about the attention that's being paid to secondary progressive MS. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for 41 years. And I have what they call secondary progressive multiple sclerosis. And for the longest time, it just seemed to me to be a very strange phase because 1 minute you're in relapsing MS, and then all of a sudden, for no real discernible reason, you become classified as secondary progressive, even though you don't really feel any different. But they've decided it's a different phase. And the insurance companies like that because they can kick you off the medications you were on, blah, blah, blah. But, whether it's a real thing or not, more attention's being paid to the mechanisms behind it and how that might get resolved by some treatment. And lately, they've been focusing a lot, as you know, on the Bruton's tyrosine kinase inhibitors. One of the kinase inhibitors that they're looking at in particular is Remibrutinib, which has been approved for other conditions, but now they're looking at it specifically for secondary progressive MS, and they're in a phase 3 trial. So this video is basically focused on explaining the recruiting that's going on. But I wanted to get this out because the recruiting is going on right now and it's international, so there's a number of locations where you can go to sign up for the trial if you're interested. So let's take a look. This is an email that I get a couple of times a month, and this one was from February 16th of 2026. What it does is it tells me all of the neurology clinical trials that are ongoing at the moment. And of course, I would see repeats a lot because those trials are recruiting for a long period of time. But as you can see, there's all kinds of neurological conditions included here. Alzheimer's and dementia, epilepsy and migraine, and then you get to multiple sclerosis. Now, sometimes there's quite a few, and sometimes there's only a couple. And like this time, we're down to just a couple that are recruiting right now. But I particularly wanted to look at this first one, a study to evaluate the efficacy and safety of Remibrutinib in secondary progressive multiple sclerosis. This is actively recruiting, so I thought we would take a look. And this is from MedPage Today, just as the email came from MedPage Today. So this, once I clicked on the link, this is what I got. It takes you out to their version of the clinical trial description. It's a study to evaluate the efficacy and safety of Remibrutinib in secondary progressive multiple sclerosis. It says it's recruiting for phase 3. So that means it's pretty far along in the process. They've already looked in previous trials at safety. This trial is looking for a larger sample size so that they can test this drug on more people in the hopes of now being able to go forward with FDA approval. Now, I could stay on this page and we could just go through it right from here, but they don't have quite all the information that you would get if you went out to the actual clinical trials link. So I'm going to click on that and take us out to clinical trials. And here we are on the clinicaltrials.gov website for this exact study. And you can see that it is recruiting. The sponsor is Novartis Pharmaceuticals, and they are the ones providing the information. The last update was the 19th of February, 2026, so quite recently. We can scroll through here. We can see the study overview. We'll just read a little of that. The brief summary is that the purpose of this study is to provide efficacy and safety data for Remibrutinib in patients with secondary multiple sclerosis. And the detailed description is that it's a phase 3 randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, multi-center, parallel group, event-driven study to evaluate the efficacy, safety, and tolerability of remibrutinib in SPMS patients. Approximately 1,275 eligible participants will be randomized to receive either remibrutinib or matching placebo. The study consists of an event-driven core part with double-blind treatment, followed by an extension part with open-label remibrutinib treatment. The contacts and locations are here. As you can see, there's a phone number and an email address if you want to know more than what is on this particular page. But the part that I think is of interest to us is where this study is taking place. It's got 24 locations, they say. So let's just focus on that. I'm going to go quickly through here so you can just get a feel for whether they have a location near you. As far as the United States goes, there's locations in Alabama, Arizona, California, Florida, there's several in Florida, Maryland, Michigan, and Tennessee. There's some other countries as well. Australia, for example, there's 3 locations in Australia, which is nice to see, and Canada has several locations in the Quebec province. India also has some locations, and Israel as well has quite a few. And then in Switzerland. The other thing that's always good to look at is the participation criteria. Are we even eligible for this test or not? I'll be curious because at my age, I'm not quite sure that I will be qualified to participate, even if I decide that I want to. But here are the eligibility criteria. For the inclusion criteria, meaning you can be included, there they are. You have to have consent. You can be male or female, aged 18 to 65. So I think I'm out of that one because I'm 66 now. So that leaves me out. That's too bad in a way, but maybe it's better that I step aside for a while. I've done several clinical trials, and maybe it's better to just let somebody else do it. And you have to have had a diagnosis of secondary progressive MS, which I would have been qualified for. Absence of documented clinical relapses in the last 24 months. Depending on how you define a relapse, I'm probably okay with that, but it would be probably open to some debate. And the EDSS score of 3 to 6, that would definitely be me. Documented evidence of disability progression in the 12 months before screening. I don't know. I'm not sure what they actually documented. So that, again, could be a problem. But then there's some exclusion criteria, and those are just as important, right? Unwilling or unable to undergo MRI scans. And some people don't really like MRI because either they're claustrophobic or they just don't like them. Or they have metal implants, in which case there's nothing much you can do about it. History of clinically significant central nervous system disease, such as stroke, traumatic brain or spinal injury, history or presence of myelopathy or neurological disorders which may mimic multiple sclerosis, which I guess would be a confounding factor. Substance abuse, PML, progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, or neurological symptoms consistent with PML, women of childbearing age, significant bleeding risk or coagulation disorders, use of exclusionary medication prior to screening, randomization as listed in the protocol. So there's certain medications that you could be on that would keep you from being eligible. And there's other protocols that you can look at if you're interested. And here is the primary outcome measure. They have one, and it is this right here. Time to 6-month confirmed disability progression on expanded disability status scale. So they're going to use that tried and true scale to see if you've progressed. And I don't know that that is the very best thing, but it has to be something that everyone agrees on, I guess. Something that's easily available to all the testing locations. So I guess that's why they're doing it. I don't know. I think there's a lot more going on when you have MS than whether you can walk or not. And EDSS tends to focus a lot on whether you can walk. But they do have a secondary outcome measure, and that is time to 3 months confirmed disability progression on EDSS. So it's the same thing in a way, it's just a different time frame. And they have the same reasons for choosing EDSS, and then they have time to 6-month confirmed disability improvement on EDSS. And then another secondary outcome is time to 3-month worsening by at least 20% in time 25 foot walk, which again is focusing heavily on your ability to walk. And while I'm not saying that's not of interest or use, it seems like that limits MS so much to what's going on physically. Time to 3-month worsening by at least 20% in 9-hole peg test. Okay, that's going to measure your hand and finger dexterity and stamina and all that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit different from the ability to walk, but again, it's focusing on your physicality. I hope they have something in here that gets at your cognition. Annualized rate of new or enlarging T2 lesions. Well, I guess that's helpful to look at. Within the time frame they're talking about, I would hope that there's not an appreciable enlarging of the lesions, because at our stage of MS, it goes slowly. The progression is pretty slow. And then the annualized rate of brain atrophy, that's good that they're checking on that. But again, you're going to have to correlate that with the regular or the normal brain atrophy that one gets as one gets older. So I guess they're looking at whatever you particularly have as a baseline, and that whether your continued atrophy is within expected range of a person at your age, or if your brain is actually shrinking faster than is normal for your age. And then they have a time to 6-month worsening by at least 4 points in the symbol digit modalities test. And we know what that is. That's that one where you get symbols and you have to write down the appropriate number that matches with the symbol. You get a little key up at the top. But the test is really measuring how good I think you are at remembering, rather than having to keep stopping to refer back to the key. So again, that is getting at cognition, and that's good. That's useful to see whether, because I would think that it could be a pretty significant difference. But with any of these tests, my concern always is that, at least with me, on any given day, or even within an hour or two, my scores might be quite different, because my MS just tends to, I don't know, work that way. It's not consistent even day to day, let alone months, which is probably the time in between taking these tests. It's probably months, and I don't know. It's kind of hard to know that you could really trust the data that you're getting from that. I don't know that I trust it for myself, so I'm not sure. But maybe with 1,200 plus people that they're recruiting, the data will all work itself out. That's one nice thing about having a very large data set, is that these small deviations tend to get lost in the sauce in a good way, because sometimes I think each of us having individual idiosyncrasies about our MS, a small sample size is really going to bring those out and maybe give them more influence over the results than they ought to have. But if you have a large sample set, that is not quite as likely. And then finally, number of participants with adverse events and serious adverse events. So they're still looking at safety even at this stage. They've been through a couple of phases, but they never stop looking at safety. And then the collaborators, that are involved, it looks just like all they're going to have here is Novartis. They don't say that there's any university or anybody that's collaborating with it. Now, a big part of the reason for optimism about Remibrutinib is that it has just been awarded FDA approval for use in another condition, and I will go out to drugs.com just to show you this. We're not going to obviously look at the whole thing because it doesn't pertain to MS, except that because it's been approved for another condition, it's been through all the phase 1, 2, and 3 trials, and the results have been good enough that the FDA's given it the green light. This article says that Novartis Remibrutinib is the first therapy to achieve phase 3 primary endpoint in chronic inducible urticaria, or CINDU. And that comes out of Basel, Switzerland on February 18th of 2026. They say that Novartis today announced positive top-line results from its pivotal phase 3 REMIND trial of oral Remibrutinib in chronic inducible urticaria, or CINDU. The primary endpoint was met for the 3 most prevalent types of CINDU: symptomatic dermographism, cold urticaria, and cholinergic urticaria, achieving significantly higher complete response rates versus placebo at week 12. These data represent an important advance in the treatment of CINDU, demonstrating the potential of Remibrutinib to be the first targeted therapy for CINDU and address a major unmet need. And here are the 3 summary bullet points for the study and its outcomes. The first one is that statistically significant and clinically meaningful results seen in REMIND trial, with complete responses achieved in 3 CINDU types. And the second one says that Remibrutinib, a highly selective oral BTK inhibitor, was well tolerated and demonstrated a favorable safety profile, including no liver safety concerns. And that is the reason that I pulled this, because that's going to be true for those of us with multiple sclerosis as well. So this study really does give us some confidence and comfort that if this does get FDA approved, we're not going to be dealing with liver enzyme problems, which many of the therapies cannot promise. So this is a good thing. And then the third one is that oral Remibrutinib has potential to be the first targeted therapy approved for CINDU, which affects estimated 29 million adults worldwide. And that's, so that's the reason that I pulled this out. Well, I'd be interested to know if you're going to sign up for this trial. I really like that the liver enzymes are not at all affected by Remibrutinib. That's going to be very important to me going forward for sure. I have to be especially careful of anything that affects my liver functions. Recently, I've been hospitalized with liver overreactivity because of a clinical trial that I was in testing a cancer drug that hit my liver, and even though I felt fine, my liver did not enjoy the experience. So I am no longer able to have that one, and I bet you that once that becomes known, a lot of other trials I might not be a good candidate for, because the compound that's being tested might actually affect the liver. But I am curious to know if you're interested in signing up for this trial, and if you do get involved in it, let me know. I'm really kind of excited about this. I've had a lot of hope for the BTK inhibitors, and I'm really thinking that this one may go the distance. We'll be patient. Let's see how long it takes. And in the meantime, do take really good care of yourself. I'll see you again in my next video.